Art exists to reflect the human experience. Whether it attracts or repulses us, it finds itself driven into existence by the compulsion to create a tangible representation of our condition. It's important to recognize that art seldom ever comes into existence out of the void. HP Lovecraft is an influential figure in the horror space. He also held some repugnant views on groups of people. Those views found themselves in turn reflected within his work. In some cases, inextricably linked to them. They informed his stories, which have gone on to be infinitely more influential than they were within his own time. Some would argue, upon that basis alone, that we should remove him and his work from our purview. And yet, it cannot be denied the vast number of works that find themselves directly influenced by Lovecraft's writings. There are countless authors, musicians, artists, and others who undeniably abhor his personal views on race and still find much of value within his work. They are able to derive influence from it despite its connections to Lovecraft's personal bigotries. Certainly, it helps that Lovecraft died before many of his devotees were even born. We sit generations removed from the birth of cosmic horror. We can assuage our feelings of guilt knowing that while the man loomed large in its rise in popularity, Lovecraft did not give birth to the genre. He did not live long enough to see its evolution into what it exists as today. It could be said that his critical and commercial failure appeals to our sense of justice. Lovecraft had bad views and was rightfully punished for them karmically. It's a view that's often taken, perhaps disingenuously, as a way of simply avoiding the topic. I would go so far as to say that it is a bad argument. While it may allay our feelings of guilt for consuming the works of someone we disagree with ideologically, it is a poor justification for that consumption. More importantly, it is a terrible way to discuss a work and critique it. Art is an expression, and an artist's commercial success or failure will never determine a work's inherent values. Artists will die, but the art will live on, and in Lovecraft's case, his influence has loomed large in the zeitgeist. But perhaps one of the reasons we can detach the work from the man is how Lovecraft approached adaptation. During his life, he found himself very welcoming to those who would adapt his ideas and build upon them. In a sense, while Lovecraft found himself at the origin of his mythos, we cannot say culturally that it belongs to Lovecraft anymore. From the stories he wrote, which now find themselves in the public domain, you or I may take from them what we will, and we are free to discard what we find repulsive. And in that, there is value to be had. Of the work proper, we can acknowledge that there is much within itself which reflects the many universal truths of people's deepest anxieties. His stories are filled with the nebulous and unknowable. Many of us have felt creeping dread and not known why, be it from a sense of wrongness with the world or a distinct lack of control in our lives. His work taps into our sense of survival that only comes from being deeply scarred emotionally without having any true comprehension of why it happened. I would argue that is intrinsic to his continuing appeal. This is why Lovecraft's work is mutable, and why we're able to separate the art from the artist. Regardless of social standing or background, life finds itself reflective of cosmic horror's deepest existential threats. And so, for many of us, those horrors are relatable on a fundamental level. Though it's important to acknowledge how Lovecraft's personal ideologies may have influenced his stories, it is vitally important to understand how we're able to adapt his work without attaching them. The ideas that exist within those stories are greater than his ideologies. They are greater than Lovecraft.